Emergency declaration down in flames. Our reporting begins with a live look at the White House and what President Trump called a loyalty test. A vote in the Senate on whether to block the president's declaration of a national emergency at the Mexico border. Democrats stood united. Republicans are very much not. In the last hour, not a few, but 12 Republicans voted against the president in the Senate. They were Senators Rand Paul of Kentucky, Mike Lee of Utah, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Arkansas, Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, Mitt Romney of Utah, Jerry Moran of Kansas, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Rob Portman of Ohio, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, Marco Rubio of Florida, and Roy Blunt of Missouri, all of them voting against the president, along with every Democrat. It is a strong bipartisan rebuke of President Trump's plan. Congress has overturned the national emergency declaration that would have provided funding for the president's proposed border wall. Remember, he asked the House for money. The House said no. Then he declared a national emergency. And now Congress has said no again. But next, the president promises he'll veto. We have Team Fox coverage. John Roberts reporting from the White House. First, Mike Emanuel reporting live from Capitol Hill. Mike?
Well, Shep, there were attempts by some Senate Republicans to cut a deal with President Trump to see if perhaps they could limit future national emergencies. But sources say they were not entirely clear of where the president stood in some of these proposals that were offered to him. So here is why Utah Senator Mitt Romney was a no today.
I'm going to be voting in favor of the resolution of disapproval. For me, this is a constitutional question. It's a question about the balance of power that is core to our Constitution. This is not about the president or about border security. In fact, I support border security. I support the construction of a border barrier.
In terms of Republicans supporting the president on this issue, Florida Senator Rick Scott explained why he understands, or says why he understands, the president's frustration on this immigration issue.
The president didn't like this process. He tried. He, tried to get, funding done. He offered other things. He offered to do something with DACA. And the Democrats are it's just pure hatred of the president. They just say they don't want the president to have a win. Well, the truth is, Americans need to have a win.
North Carolina Republican Senator Tom Tillis was initially against the president's national emergency on border security. He changed his vote today. He is up for re-election next year in a battleground state. Shep.
Mike Emanuel, what did we hear from Democrats on this?
Well, you heard the Senate Democratic leader making the case that the president's executive action here is unconstitutional.
The framers gave Congress the power of the purse in Article 1 of the Constitution. It's probably our greatest power. And now the president is claiming that power for himself under a guise of an emergency declaration to get around a Congress that repeatedly would not authorize his demand for a border wall.
And Colorado Democrat Senator Michael Bennet picked apart some of the president's language on this issue.
Much of the wall has been fully renovated or built. That's what your president is saying to you. At exactly the same time he's saying he needs a national emergency to build the wall. It is preposterous. It is a joke.
Democrats appear to be enjoying forcing President Trump to use his veto power for the first time. Shep.
Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill. The president billed today's vote in stark terms. A vote with him was a vote for border security. A vote against him was a vote against border security. The truth is, both sides say they want stronger border security, but they disagree on how best to accomplish the goal. And further, of course, this issue of the emergency declaration itself is front and center. As outlined in the Constitution, there's a separation of powers in America. The House of Representatives is granted the power of the purse strings. Democrats insist the president's emergency is no emergency at all, but an attempt to build the wall for which the funding was denied. The Chief White House correspondent John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John?
Shep, good afternoon to you. And the president and the White House were twisting arms pretty hard trying to stem the bleeding here. It wasn't as bad as their worst case scenario, but it was pretty bad when you have 12 Republican senators defecting. The president even offering up this morning to change the Presidential Emergency Powers Act in the future, but saying that he needed the money now. But as you heard Mitt Romney say in Mike Emanuel's report, this was not about building a border barrier. This was just about the constitutionality of who controls the purse strings. So this bill will cross the president's desk sometime in the next either few hours to few days, and he will, for the very first time, use his veto pen to kill the bill. It's not sure if it'll go back to the House and the Senate for a veto override vote. Nancy Pelosi has not committed to one of those votes. She's probably about 40 votes shy of overturning it in the House, and based on the Senate vote, there aren't the 67 votes to kill it, or at least to restore it in the Senate either. And the president, meantime, plans to keep building miles of new border barrier along the southern border, or near the southern border, as it is the case in Texas. In his new budget, he's asked for $8.6 billion to build new wall. Democrats say he's not going to get any of that money, but the president insisting this morning, as he sat with Ireland's prime minister in the Oval Office, that a lot of border barriers being built right now. Listen here.
There's a lot of wall going up. I don't know if you see it. I don't know if you want to see it. But we're building a lot of wall, and there's a lot of contracts being let out actually tomorrow and over the next week for additional many, many miles of wall. And we're going to have hundreds of miles of wall up fairly soon.
Now, there has been a sharp uptick in the number of people apprehended at the border this year. The president saying in the Oval Office a little while ago that the system is at a breaking point. Listen here.
They're apprehending. Call it whatever you want to use, whatever you'd like to use. But they're apprehending thousands and thousands of people a month. And we're catching them and we're keeping them. We're not doing a release. Now, at a certain point, we're going to have to do some release because we don't have the bed space, we don't have the room, and we don't have the funds to build this space.
Now, the president also said in that Oval Office appearance that we're seeing record numbers of people apprehended at the border, which is not a factual statement. Certainly, the numbers that we saw last month in February, 76,000, do represent an 11-year high, but they are well off the record, which was set in modern times. When you look at the records going from 2000 all the way up to 2018, the high point, Shep, was in March of 2000 when 220,000 people were apprehended at the border. So we're still not there, but we are at an 11-year high. Shep?
And the claim of new wall, that's just inaccurate as well, because anything that's being built is from previous allocations and nothing new because it hasn't been approved.
It is, but it's, I mean, liken it to, okay, you've got a car, it's a 67 Dodge, and you've got a new car, but you didn't get two cars. They're just replacing existing wall with new border barrier. But it's different. In some cases, it was just landing mat fencing, and now they're putting up this 30-foot high bollard wall. So the fence itself is new, but you're not getting a lot more distance out of it, though the president will get a number of miles, at least 70, out of the new appropriation from Congress, as well as some other things that he's doing, even without the money from the emergency declaration. Shep?
All righty then. Thank you, John. John Roberts on the North Lawn. Let's get to Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday Now 12. He had laid this out pretty starkly, Chris. He said, you with me or you're against me here? And he had 12 defectors. I guess different defectors had different reasons.
Yeah, I would say this is more of a procedural or even constitutional issue than it is a policy issue. As you heard in Mike Emanuel's report, a number of these people support building a border wall, but they don't support the idea of a national emergency. Now, just to make it clear, there's a National Emergencies Act that was passed by Congress in 1976, and there have been dozens of emergencies that have been declared by various presidents for various purposes, but there has never been one where a president went to Congress, asked for money, was rejected by Congress, and then used emergency powers to get the money that Congress wouldn't give them in the first place. That's what sets this one apart from all the others, and that's why you've got a number of Republican senators saying, I support the wall, but I don't support this idea of basically violating Article 1 of the Constitution, which gives Congress, not the president, Congress, the power of the purse.
And yet, in the past, Chris, when Republicans have gone against his wishes, he has enacted retribution in one way or another. What might these individual senators expect from him, if anything?
I don't think very much, given the fact that there are so many. There are 12. And the other thing worth noting is this isn't the first time this year this has happened. In fact, in February, 46 Republican senators sided with Democrats to vote against the president's decision at that point to make a very quick pullout of all U.S. troops from Syria. The president then had to reverse course. He's keeping 400 troops in Syria. And just yesterday, 7 Republican senators voted against the president with Democrats to create a majority to pull all U.S. troops, all aid for the Saudi effort in Yemen. So this is at least the third time in the last month and a half when Republican senators have provided a majority, along with strong Democratic support, to vote against the president's policy. So this is clearly a political defeat for the president. In a practical sense, it won't be, because, as John and Mike have pointed out, he's going to be able to veto the resolution of disapproval, and Congress doesn't have the votes to override it. In fact, in the House, may not even take a vote, because there's so many moderates for whom this would be a difficult vote. They are in red or purple districts, and they don't want to be seen as voting again against the president's wall. So Nancy Pelosi may not even bring this up for an override.
Which is exactly the place where we've been reporting for months that we expected to be at this point, and that is he declares his emergency on the coast or on the border there, and then it's tied up in lawsuits and nothing happens.
Well, we'll have to see. We haven't had a ruling by a court yet out in the Ninth Circuit, for instance, out west, staying the president's emergency order. But clearly, it looks now like after the president's veto, this will no longer be in Congress. It'll end up going to the courts. We'll see what a judge there decides.
Politically there, does that give the president something? Will he then be able to say, heading into 2020, look, you saw I did everything I could do. I did everything, all the way down to a veto. I tried to get your wall, build the wall, and couldn't get it done.
Absolutely. Look, this is one of the real articles of faith between President Trump and his base support in 2016. I mean, how many times did we hear him say, we're going to build a wall? Yes, there were other things he said, like Mexico was going to pay for it. Clearly, they aren't. But at least he can say, first of all, he is going to be able to build some new wall with the money that was appropriated by Congress and the money he's going to repurpose. But even if he's blocked in the national emergency and he builds, I think John was saying, 77 miles of new wall, at least he can say, look, I have done everything I could. I took it to Congress. I vetoed when they disapproved my national emergency declaration. Depending on what happens in the courts, it either goes through or doesn't there. But I've done everything I could, and Lord knows a Democrat wouldn't. So that'll be the argument he makes.
Real quickly, but at the beginning of the day, it looked like there were 5 who were definitely going to vote against him here. Getting to 12 wasn't, as John Roberts put it, the worst-case scenario. But of any of those individuals, do you see one who's making a statement on some other level? Or is this all about the Constitution says that the House controls the purse strings, and, sir, Mr. President, respectfully, you do not? Is anyone saying more than that?
I don't think so. Maybe some of the more moderate people like Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski, potentially. But this, in a sense, was kind of an easy vote for some Republicans because they didn't have to buck the president's policy and say, we don't agree with you on building the border wall. This is about the separation of powers, Constitution, and we're standing up for our own institution against what we see as you overreaching in deciding to declare a national emergency and take money we didn't approve in the first place.